The sun had just set over the bustling city, casting a warm orange glow over the crowded streets. Amidst the chaos, a small shadow detached itself from its owner's leg. The owner, a young professional, was too engrossed in her phone to notice the sudden separation. At first, the shadow didn't know what to do with itself. It had been tied to its owner for as long as it could remember, moving in sync with their every step. Now, it was free to explore on its own. The shadow gazed around, taking in the sights and sounds of the city. People rushed past, some glancing down at their own feet, while others seemed oblivious to the tiny creature hovering nearby. The shadow decided to test its newfound freedom by following a group of street performers. They juggled clubs, played music, and performed acrobatics, drawing a small crowd. The shadow watched in fascination as they worked together seamlessly, each one contributing to the performance. It noticed how the shadows themselves seemed to dance around the performers' bodies, adding an extra layer of depth to their acts. As the performers packed up their equipment, the shadow decided to continue its solo adventure. It wandered through alleys and side streets, taking in the unique sounds and smells of each neighborhood. The scent of freshly baked bread wafted from a nearby bakery, enticing the shadow to investigate. Inside the bakery, the shadow discovered an array of delicious treats: sweet pastries, savory breads, and flaky croissants. The owner, a jovial man with a bushy beard, offered the shadow a tiny piece of cake as a welcome gesture. The shadow gratefully accepted, savoring the moist texture and rich flavors. As it devoured the cake, the shadow realized that its own identity was not defined by its relationship with its owner. It had always assumed that being tied to someone meant losing its sense of self, but now it saw that this connection had also given it a unique perspective on the world. The shadow continued its exploration, visiting markets and shops, and even taking a detour into a nearby park. There, it watched as children played tag, laughing and chasing each other around the lush green grass. The shadow felt a pang of loneliness, but knew that it was ready to forge its own path. As night began to fall, the shadow settled down on a bench in the park, observing the stars twinkling above. It pondered the meaning of freedom and the complexities of its own existence. For the first time, the shadow felt like it could be more than just an extension of someone else's body. It was a separate entity with its own thoughts and desires. The next morning, the shadow decided to return home, but this time, it felt different. It knew that it had discovered something profound about itself, that even though it was no longer tied to its owner, it still wanted to connect with others. The shadow returned to its original spot on the leg, hovering just above the ground as its owner went about her day. The owner noticed the shadow's unusual behavior and smiled knowingly. "You're trying to find yourself," she said, not looking up from her phone. "I'm proud of you." The shadow watched as its owner continued to work, feeling a sense of pride in its newfound independence. Though it was back where it started, the shadow knew that it had undergone a transformation. As the days passed, the shadow found itself exploring its neighborhood with renewed enthusiasm. It discovered hidden alleys and secret gardens, all while keeping an eye out for new friends to meet. The shadow realized that being alone didn't mean losing connection. It could lead to deeper understanding and appreciation of oneself and others. Years went by, and the shadow continued to grow as a distinct entity. It learned to communicate with other shadows and even developed its own unique abilities, like manipulating light and darkness. Though it still maintained ties with its owner, the shadow had become something more: a symbol of resilience and self-discovery in an often overwhelming world. One day, the shadow decided to take one final journey back to where it all began, its original spot on the leg. As it settled onto its familiar surface, it looked up at its owner, now an elderly woman with gray hair and kind eyes. The shadow smiled, knowing that they had come full circle. "You know," the owner said, smiling softly, "I'm glad you found yourself." The shadow nodded in agreement, grateful for the journey that had led it to this moment of understanding. And as it settled back into its original spot, the shadow realized that home was not where one's body lay, but where one's heart and spirit were. The shadow had discovered a new perspective on life, one that emphasized connection over separation, growth over stagnation. Its solo journey had been just the beginning of an incredible adventure, one that would continue to evolve as it explored this vast world, always seeking more meaning and purpose.